Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. My name is Mehad, and I'm from LightCastle, and I'm happy to have you all here in this session called Leveraging Startup Investments for Bangladesh's Economic Growth. In this session, we aim to share insights about the progress of our startup ecosystem, and we have also brought in 4 key experts in our panel to share their perspectives as well. So in this panel, we have Hassan Arifai, who's the head of investments portfolio from Startup Bangladesh Limited, which is the largest government-backed VC fund. Next, we also have Sadia Abaf, who's the founder and CEO of ShareTrip. It's the leading ticketing platform, travel tech platform in Bangladesh. Next, we have Nichur Rahman, who's the CEO of Bangladesh Angels, which is the largest angel network here. And lastly, we have Rahat Pai, who's the founding partner and CEO of Anchorless Bangladesh, one of the most active VC funds here. So before we dive into the panel discussion, I would like to invite Bijun Pai to give a quick keynote presentation and give a quick glimpse about the startup ecosystem here in Bangladesh. Mr. Bijun Islam, he's the co-founder and CEO of LightCastle Partners, which I call it is the next McKinsey of Bangladesh. Bijun Pai, over to you.
Thank you, Meher. I think that's a more humbling introduction. I don't know that we can go and become the McKinsey, but we'll try our best. I'm just gonna share my screen. I think let me know if it's visible. Hold on, I'm just gonna put this up. I'm gonna go into slideshow mode. Am I visible, everyone? Yeah, great.
Good.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to take quickly around 10 minutes to kind of give an overview of what happened in the Bangladesh startup ecosystem in 21-22. I do want to start by acknowledging our partners. So this report and this presentation would not have been possible without the support from Startup Bangladesh Limited, without the support from Anchorless Bangladesh, helping us crunch all the data, reviewing detailed comments on the report, without Bangladesh Angels extensive network, and without the support of the BD Startup Founders Group. And I think Sadia Apa today from ShareTrip is representing that particular group as well. So I'm not going to do the whole report, but I'm just going to do a bit of snapshots. So we want to talk a bit about Bangladesh, where they are compared to the global economy. We're going to take a look at what are the drivers of the startup ecosystem, and then we're going to take a look at what are the investor trends, what's been happening, and then we'll try to chart our way forward. I mean, just to see what's next coming up for Bangladesh, right? So, I mean, venture funding has, in the world today has, I think from 2020 to 2021 has more than doubled, right? As something around 148 billion was invested in 2020. In 2021, this becomes so close to 288 million. I think we have more than 1,000 plus unicorns, decacorns, and hectacorns now, even all over the world. But what's very interesting is a lot of these large startups and these unicorns are from Asia, from Middle East, from Africa, from China, from India. And that's exciting, right? Asian companies are doing quite well. And we do understand, of course, the global recession might happen and there might be a bit of short-term crunch on the funding flow, but that doesn't stop the fact there are a lot of startups out there who are raising a lot of funding and possibly making impactful change to the whole world. If you take a look at Bangladesh, I just did a comparison in terms of GDP versus the amount of startup investments that has been made. If you look at someone like India and China, where the startup investment to GDP ratio is something like 0.5, 1.3. Singapore is, of course, one of the highest, around 28.41% of the GDP. The startup investment to GDP ratio is around 28%. But if you look at even Bangladesh and Pakistan, compared to even regional pairs like Vietnam, Philippines, India, the ratio is quite low. It's around 0.1%. So definitely, I think, is a room for growth as well. I think we all know that right now, that Bangladesh is one of the fastest growing countries in the world with a population of 165 million. We just crossed, GDP USD $2,000 per capita, and we are possibly will graduate to a middle income economy by 2026. The GDP right now, as you saw, is larger than actually Singapore as well at this point of time. We also crossed $50 billion in export. I understand the doing business index, we're still improving. We're still 168, but that index was discontinued. But what's interesting is we also have a large population who is tech savvy. I think 62% is under the age of 35. We have close to 125 million people on the internet. Out of that, around 40 to 50 million are active internet users, and I think we have more than 110 plus mobile financial services account. Right? If you look at the kind of the driving factors, I mean, we have very increasing digitization. I mean, this definitely directly supports the startups from the e-commerce industry to mobile financial services transactions. I think 2 out of every 3 people actually have a mobile financial service account. That that shows the kind of penetration that's happening. I always tell people that, in other economies, people have leapfrogged desktops to go into laptops and smart devices. In Bangladesh, people are leapfrogging traditional banking services to go into digital financial services and mobile financial services. We have a large growing middle and affluent class population. Just to give an idea, the middle and affluent population will become 34 million by 2025-26. That's larger than the total population of Malaysia, right? And again, I think the private, the public policy is supportive. A lot of new policy and support also coming up. I mean, we have Hassan Bhai, who is the head of portfolio investments for Startup Bangladesh Limited, the first of its venture capital fund. But I think a lot of other policy supports are also coming. And if those becomes a reality, things like startups being able to list in stock exchanges, things like Bangladesh is able to invest outside and hold shares in holdcos, more fund-of-fund structures, and those can definitely support this ecosystem further. At this point, I'll just quickly go and kind of show you this kind of like a chart that we kind of did what happened in 2014. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. A disclaimer, we couldn't fit everyone in one chart. But if you look at it, what makes me happy that everywhere it grew, right? And as it grew from 2019, 2021, it's more crowded. So we are seeing government initiatives. We are seeing investments that are happening, right? SoftBank invested in Bangladesh for the first time in 2021, right? And that's just the start. We are seeing a lot of international funds are looking at Bangladesh. International corporates are looking at Bangladesh, and we have seen, a lot of investors taking interest as well. I think we have also started seeing mergers and acquisition. I think we have also saw Chaldal acquire Banglamed, Shikho acquire Bohubri. These things are also started happening. So I think it's an exciting time to see the ecosystem kind of grow from baby steps to maybe kind of an early preteen before it kind of takes off. Again, this is supported by a host of investors. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. If we have missed anyone, do apologize, write to us. We'll try to include you. But, if you look at the investors, international, local, angel networks, accelerators and incubators, private sectors, so who are supporting these, trade associations, government initiatives like the Startup Bangladesh Limited, High Tech Park, programs like the Bangladesh Innovation Grant, development partners like DFIs like IFC, the Swiss Embassy, who are supporting academia and universities like NSC Startups Next, University of Dhaka. A lot of different competitions that are taking place, and again, there are a lot of auxiliary support, different kind of firms who are also supporting these initiatives as well. So I think it's a crowded space, and every time this slide gets more crowded, I'm excited by that. Hundreds of startups. I think over the last decade, we have raised close to 800 million in funding. But I think that's just the start, right? And I think the average ticket size has also increased directly or and indirectly. There are close to 1.5 million plus jobs that are being generated. So I think these are exciting. In 2021, we did see close to 60 investment deals that happened. If you look at kind of chart, as I say, I think the startup investment really started picking up from 2018, right? Largely, I think that Bikash had the first deal with Ant Financials, right? But I mean, in 2019, 2020, we had the momentum. 2021, we had close to 400 million plus invested. This does include Bikash, which is a larger part of the deal. But even without that, we had close to 160 million plus of investments done. And again, 2022 up to Q2, we still have 90 million invested. So we're excited. And you can see kind of like a mix of global and local investors, right? We can see there's a large percentage of global investments that definitely happen, but local investments definitely needs to pick up. In terms of sector, obviously, because large round Shop Up, which is the raise close to 160 million in aggregate. They classify themselves as an embedded finance company. So you have fintech, which drives most of the investments, but you have logistics and mobility, including ride sharing, including companies like say Trucklagbe, Loop, who have raised international investments, followed by e-commerce, healthcare, consumer services, software technology, food and agriculture is getting very interested. And then, of course, there are emerging sectors like education, companies like Shikho who have raised investment, companies like 10 Minute School who have raised investment, sports and entertainment and travel. I think we also have Sadia here as well. I think, again, a large percentage of the investments comes from venture funds, but we also have a bit of mix of angels and corporates in that particular mix as well. Again, this is just a kind of a cross section. In fintech, we have companies like Shop Up, iFarmer, Shatin. So it's both early stage and more mature companies. As I said, I already did a brief snapshot of the logistics. E-commerce is again e-commerce. We also having investments in e-commerce market companies like Swap, healthcare. We have companies like Maya, Prava, Aroggo, who recently raised investments as well. And then you have consumer service software technology, some of the larger services. And again, you can see the number of deals that has happened on each, right? I mean, say fintech had 23 deals, logistics, mobility, e-commerce obviously has the highest number of deals at 40 deals till date. I think I'm almost at the end. Again, this is something that happened in 2021-22. Of course, Bikash kind of led that, but we had investments from all over. We had fintech, logistics, mobility, and we had interesting investors also coming up. So we had venture funds, we have DFIs, we had corporates, we had angels. So I think it's just a good mix of investments that we have at this particular point in time. What's interesting is also acquisitions started taking place. So Dara started acquired Hungry Donkey in 2021, but we also had startups acquiring other startups. I think that's interesting trend. Shiko acquired Bohubri on the skill side and mainly coding. Chaldal acquired Bangladesh, and then Goza and made the international acquisition in Pakistan, Find My Adventures, which was interesting for a Bangladeshi company to do international acquisition as well. Again, this is just some of the case studies that we had. Again, I'm just going to zoom through this. Don't want to take a lot of time. I like this slide because it gets crowded every time, right? As I said, that we have more commercial side global investors. I can see the Anchorless logo there, but we had everyone. Like we have Vian, we had Prince Street, Inflection Ventures, Adventure Capital, Frontier Fund, and then we have corporates like Gojek and Financials. We had SoftBank, we had Valor Ventures, Wavemaker, Learn Capital Investing, and let's not forget the local investors. We are seeing increased investments, obviously, from Startup Bangladesh Limited. But we also have other investors like IDLC, who's investing, and then SBK Tech Ventures as well, investing as well. And we also have the largest angel network, Bangladesh Angels, in there as well. There are a few, again, impact-oriented investors like IFC, the Swiss Embassy, Avishkar in the mix as well. But I'm glad that this gets crowded every time, right? These are, again, some of the case studies. As I said, Startup Bangladesh, I think, invested close to 18 companies with follow-ons. Anchorless, I think, 5 are being showcased here, but there are a few more on the pipeline. And then this is another program with the Swiss Embassy on the development impact-oriented funds that has also invested. These are kind of like a snapshot. I mean, what kind of portfolios these companies have. Again, this is not an exhaustive. We put in some of the examples that we had, but I'm definitely sure there are more examples that are out there. And we have all sorts of investors, right? We have the angel networks, we have international corporates like Ecom Express, and Gojek. We have local corporates like Deco Isho. We have DFIs like IFC. We have accelerator programs like Sarge and Accelerating Asia. We have global investors like SoftBank, Anchorless, Valor. And we have local investors like Ideal, Sister Bangladesh Limited, and SBK Tech Ventures. Again, this is my last slide. Again, a lot of things has been done, but I think what would be interesting is to something have come from a startup policy with clear definitions. Fund of funds, similar to what is in India, a SIDBI, a Small Industry Development Bank of India, which kind of started out a lot of local venture capital firms. They have close to 720 local venture capital firms now. I think the sandbox scheme that can allow especially regulatory tech or fintech startups to kind of structure out would be very helpful. And then, of course, investment-friendly policies, especially regarding repatriation of profits, allowing local investors to hold shares outside, easier doing business of index, better industry academic collaboration, and continue this support that the government has, but not just the Ministry of ICT. If this goes down through the whole government with BIDA, the central bank, and every other ministries coming on board, I think that will be really, really helpful. Again, thank you very much for listening to me. I think I have taken 10 minutes. Oh, sorry, I took a slightly bit more. But again, thank you to our partners who supported in this report. And Mehab, back to you.
Thank you, Bijam Bhai. This was very insightful from our part. Definitely, we get reached out by a lot of startups because they want to promote Bangladesh to the global investors. And I think this report will definitely help them to get more insights. Now I'd like to go into the panel discussion. So let me go one by one and introduce our panelists. So first, I'd like to invite Nijur Rahman, who is the CEO of Bangladesh Angels. This is the country's first angel investment network, which connects startups with smart capital by individual and institutional investors. He brings with him more than 10 years of experience in the development sector, management consulting, and investment advisory, and particularly his interest in water and sanitation and early stage angel investing for frontier markets. Nijur, thank you so much for joining this session.
Always a pleasure to be in a forum with LightCastle. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to go and introduce Ms. Sadia Haq, who's the founder and CEO of ShareTree. that is the country's leading online travel platform that provides end-to-end travel solutions. Previously, she has worked at Banlink, Nokia, BBC Media Action, and Grameenphone Limited. And overall, she has over 14 years of experience with expertise in marketing. Sadiapa, nice to have you in this discussion.
Thank you, Mehat, for welcoming me here today. It's a pleasure.
Next, I would like to introduce Hassan Arif Pai, who is the head of investments portfolio of Startup Bangladesh Limited, which is the $65 million VC fund backed by the Ministry of ICT. His career spans more than 20 years of work experience with expertise in private equity and investment management. And it also includes many senior management positions in financial services and technology management companies back in the USA. In his previous role, he has worked as a vice president for State Spirit Corporation, which is one of the largest asset management companies in the world, located in Boston, Massachusetts. Hassan Arif, are you there with us? Thank you for joining in this busy schedule.
Thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure. Yeah.
All right. So last but not the least, this man needs no introduction, but Rahat Pai is the founding partner and CEO of Anchorless Bangladesh, which is one of the most active early stage venture investment fund focused on advancing the local startup ecosystem through access to global resources. He's passionate about strengthening the Bangladeshi startup ecosystem by connecting innovative local startups to global investors. And he also serves as the senior advisor at Startup Next, which is a startup incubator for North-South University, one of the country's leading private university. Radhai, are you there?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So let's go deep into the panel discussion, and I will pass the mic to Bijan Bhai. Bijan Bhai, over to you.
Thank you, Mehab, and I'm really glad that all of you are here. I know how busy you guys are. And in fact, Nijor has a flight to catch, so I'm going to start off with Nijor. Thank you for making time to do this. I mean, Nijor, you represent one of the largest angel forum in Bangladesh. I think you have 350 plus members. I think last I kind of counted, right? But I want to start off on a positive note. From your perspective, meeting with so many angels and doing this curating with so many startups in the ecosystem, what are some of the positive trends that you see in the startup ecosystem for Bangladesh? Nijor, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Bijan. And I think I would echo a lot of what you covered in your presentation, maybe touching on a few specific points, right, with regards to making my job easier. So I think one is just the continued sort of proliferation and mainstreaming of different types of basic digital services. I think Bcash is probably the number one. I think these days, I'm sure we'd all be kind of hard pressed to find a day in which we did not use Bcash or weren't asked to use Bcash, right? I just used an Uber and the guy wanted to do Bcash my change. And so I'm still waiting on that. Hopefully I get it before I fly out. But yeah, I think that's definitely one, even services like Food Panda going around the country, expanding quite rapidly. I know that's been a very good case study for Delivery Hero in the context of Bangladesh. I think that's definitely one. I think just kind of creating this class of digitally native consumers and getting them onboarded into these basic services, which then creates the room for other types of services to follow, right? Second is, I think, talent, right? To feed our ecosystem, we need a continued pipeline of talent. I think there's two main sources. So one is obviously the repatriates who come back to the country after having studied and worked abroad, built networks abroad, and have come and built businesses. Many of our first generation companies in the ecosystem have benefited from that. More recently, companies like Shiko or Aroko, who raised 1.3 million from Hyper and a few others, I think have also benefited from that talent base. The second is, even within startups themselves, right? So you have a lot of young, talented executives who work within startups, have moved up within startups, have made a name for themselves within the ecosystem, and now they're trying to build their own businesses. And I know Rahat and I are quite excited about a few of those, and we'll continue to kind of keep an eye out for that. Another important factor is obviously the proliferation of local institutional capital. You mentioned people like Deco Isho Group, you mentioned people like IDLC. Startup Bangladesh is an incredibly important pillar of the ecosystem that we want to continue to work with. I think that's important to kind of hopefully move that needle where it's so 97% foreign capital and particularly foreign institutional capital. But if we can move a little bit of that needle towards local capital, I think that's going to be important for liquidity in the sector. I think also the conversations we're having around policymaking. Sometimes in the last 3 years, I felt like I was kind of, I'm sure others in the room have felt the same way, where I feel like I was saying the same kind of prescriptions over and over. But I think, now there's movement. I know Hassan Arifai, he and I were just even talking today about some of the things like allowing, the ownership of shares in foreign holdcos and kind of consolidating cap tables across multiple jurisdictions, which is going to be very important because most of the funding will continue to come from abroad. I know Startup Bangladesh obviously has launched a partnership with the SEC and the Dhaka Stock Exchange, I think last week, around, exploring the idea of startups getting listed onto the stock market and making things easier there. That's going to be a very important source of exits in the future. So I think that's very important. I think there's some very positive movement when it comes to policy making, and that's something we just need to all kind of continue to advocate for. I think lastly, then, how does it relate to my job, and how has my job evolved, I guess, over the course of the last 3.5 years that we've run Bangladesh Angels? I think it's become easier than ever now to raise angel funding. Oftentimes we find ourselves in a position where, we can't sit on deals anymore, right? Entrepreneurs are coming to us and saying, hey, I've got a few angels, or even what's very interesting is angels are coming to us and saying, look, I've got a deal, but I want you to kind of structure it in a way where, it works for both sides. Or the entrepreneurs are saying, look, I've already got a few angels interested, can band top up with a few more, right? So that's quite interesting now. We no longer have to kind of start with deals from scratch, but we're trying to play the role, just as I know Rahat's very adamant on this as well, where, it's equitable from both sides. It's not predatory. I think that was a huge problem maybe back in 3.5, 4 years ago, when there weren't as many angels in the ecosystem. There wasn't much liquidity and there wasn't enough competition to get into startup deals. So I think that's great. I think another key change now is just the size of the deals as well. So we've done, over the last 3.5 years, about 37 deals. Half of them came this year, size and velocity, right? So half of them came this year. We've done about $6 million in aggregate. But my team and I only mention this because they're in the room, so they know they're on notice. We've got about $8.5 million worth of pipeline across maybe 8 to 10 deals. So suddenly the average ticket is going from 200 to 800, and we're working on follow-on funding. We're working on co-investments, right, with other institutional investors, both local and international. So I think that's exciting, and that's something we need to then turn into real dollars back into the ecosystem. But I think those are two things where we've just seen a lot more activity. We've seen a certain kind of level of sophistication both among founders about their power vis-a-vis investors, what they should demand of those investors, as well as investors vis-a-vis founders in terms of how they add value rather than how they kind of take value. I think that's one. And second is I think we're just doing, thanks to the proliferation of institutional capital and other types of capital from different sources, including the diaspora, I think we're seeing bigger and bigger deals and bigger ticket sizes on better terms. So I think that's something I'm very hopeful about as well.
No, thank you, Nijurba. I think this is very exciting. It's good to hear that now investors are coming to you to structure deals, and these are becoming more founder friendly. You have a pipeline. I'm excited. Thank you for mentioning that. Next, I'll move on to Hassan Bhai. Hassan Bhai, I know you also have a meeting, so just want to have you before you kind of have to run off. I'm glad that Startup Bangladesh has started, to be honest. I mean, supporting the startup ecosystem with a $60 million plus fund and having the ambitious mandate to do 50 investments over the next couple of years, so which is definitely exciting. But we also know that Startup Bangladesh is also doing a lot of policy support. So whether it's trying to bring startups to the stock market, whether it's trying to help repatriation of profits easier, or Bangladeshi investors to hold shares outside. Do you want to share some of the policy initiatives that Startup Bangladesh Limited is working on, and what are some of the policy initiatives we would possibly see in the future? Hassan Bhai, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, some of the policy initiatives you mentioned, Nijur, I mentioned, so Nijur stole my thunder, but thank you, Nijur. Anyway, so you're all on the same team. So I'm glad that everybody knows that what you're working on, and that's the thing. We would like to be transparent, and we'd like to be supportive. Everybody, we should work together. I mean, we cannot work alone, right? So we need help from Nijur, Rahat, and others, even startups like Sadia, and obviously Bijon and the legal side too. So the policy side, definitely we're working on, and we have some ambitious policy initiative that we would like to work on in order to help out not only startups, also investors, right? And also to improve the wrong perception that we have, the ease of doing business about Bangladesh. Rahat can speak to that too, I'm sure. how wrongly the index is showing about startup ecosystem or ease of doing business in Bangladesh. So one of the things that we are working on, we have started working on the startup policy, right? So that is something that we definitely need to do. Proper definition of startups and startup policy, how to help the startups, investor and everything. So that is something I think is lacking. And that's an initiative that is happening, and we hope to have a draft at some point soon. And in that policy making, obviously, we will incorporate not only regulators, startups, and investors, and all the involved parties in our ecosystem. So that's something, if we can implement as a policy, that'd be great. That will give a lot of clarity about our ecosystem and players. So let's hope that we can get a draft done soon. And another one is that we see the struggle about a lot of startups. They're creating the holding company in Singapore, Delaware, or maybe other country. Could be Canada, could be Dubai, right? That is, and in order to raise funds from the foreign investments, right? So I am hoping that our investment in Bangladesh will grow locally. Like I think Niger or Bijon, you were saying that only 3% of investment is local. That is not a good thing, right? We have a lot of local investment here. We want to be able to improve the investment locally from high individual network to the corporate ventures, VCs, everybody, right? We need to promote that. In order to do that, we need to be able to invest locally and hold share in Singapore or Delaware, right? So that is the thing that we are working on. I hope that we'll have a good traction on this by end of this year. I'm hoping. Don't hold me to that date. So if that happens, that also will open the door for a lot of foreign investments, right? That we have one cap table, is clarity there, and investment can flow, and obviously repatriation is tied to that. So that's something that we are trying to work on. And another one is tax benefit side. That's something we would like to work on with NRB. That's something also in our pipeline. And as you noticed that in the DSC SBL event that we had last 2 weeks, we want to announce, so we did an MOU with DSC. We were going to form a working group in order to see what are the regulations can be eased, relaxed, or in a rightful way, so we can help the startups go, the good startups to go IPO. We want to make sure the startup goes IPO, that they're ready to go IPO, right? So we have to have transparency, credibility, and all those things. And in this working group, I mentioned in the DSC event that we are not doing the academic exercise only. We want to do the use case, right? Bring a startup, select one of the startups, and then go through that process and do IPO. And after doing one or two, then we can have a better regulatory framework around it. And another thing that I mentioned, that we cannot have a cookie cutter regulatory regulations. We have to have some flexibility there. It could be in an existing board, it could be alternate board, whatever. So that's what we are going to work on. And in order to do that, we are going to incorporate, again, the important and knowledgeable players from the ecosystem, the people like you guys, startups, industry experts, IB experts, and they could be local and global. So that's our plan. So those are some ambitious policy-oriented work we are doing besides making investment. And hopefully, if we can do one by one, we can implement that, it will help the startup ecosystem for everybody. So let's hope. But we'll keep you guys posted and we'll get you guys involved. Thank you, Bijon.
Thank you, Hassan. But I think these are very exciting. I mean, the stock market, I think that's SBL is working on. The holding of international shares, this can definitely change the game. I mean, this will be really, really interesting in unlocking more domestic capital as well. I'll move on to Sadia Appa. Sadia Appa, I mean, the COVID hit all the travel tech companies, they were in deep trouble. But I think ShareTrip has come out stronger. So maybe kind of like a suggestions, and you were like the startups are the central of the whole ecosystem, right? What was kind of your secret sauce in surviving that? And what are your views? I know that a lot of people are talking that there might be a funding crunch in the future. So what is your view on navigating that? So any suggestions, your viewpoints, experiences to help out the ecosystem? Sadyapa, over to you.
Thank you, Bijan. Basically, the pandemic has obviously had a very significant hit on not only for the travel ecosystem, but for any industries all around the world. As you mentioned, that ShareTrip actually did not only strive, but it thrived as well at the same time. Their main reason is that it's important as a startup, as a tech-based company, to understand what the market requires, whether you are capable of, fine-tuning yourself or improvising yourself, adapting to the national disaster or the national requirement, whatever you say it, or according to your service category as well. So for the travel industry, what happened was that although the outbound tourism for direct customers was completely at stop because of all the cross-border limitations, the lockdowns and everything, but there were movements for the migrant workers, for the working migrants as well, from Bangladesh to any place outside Bangladesh, whether you're talking about the Middle Eastern countries to Europe, the ASEAN region and everything. And these migrant workers, they're actually dependent on the offline agents who were also collapsed at that point of time because no shops were opening, no offices were opening, literally everything was close to zero. So that is the capacity that we understood at that point of time, that there is a market, there is a demand, and this is the best time in order to, convert these offline agents into an online platform, because the educational journey and the training to convert these stereotyped offline agents into an online portal is extremely challenging. During our inception, we saw the same thing for our direct customers who are the tech savvy people, but even the challenge was there, to shift their mindset and their habituation depending on a physical existence of a travel agency and migrate to an OTA. So that is kind of the secret sauce that you're talking about, that whether we could play the right cards at the right time and kind of, score the points at that point of time. So that made a very significant contribution, not only to sustain ShareTrip, but also make sure that ShareTrip is taking kind of a leadership role, a stronger market presence, not only in the direct customer base, but also in the entire travel ecosystem, covering the offline agents as well. So the key, I would say, is to be progressive, to be able to adapt, to be able to innovate, because when COVID hit in March 2020, within just a matter of 6 months, we introduced 2 new platforms into the ShareTrip business portfolio. One catering for the B2B agents, and the one for our domestic hotel inventory management, which is also a very untouched and untapped area of the tourism industry. So these are the things I think, and along with that, I think the use of your local in-house tech team, that plays a very significant role. Because if you look into the startup ecosystem where there are technological developments, I would say that many of us are actually dependent on outsourcing the resources or outsourcing the whether your software, your tech stack and everything. So whenever there is a dependency on external factors, you cannot literally, manipulate or, aggravate your developments according to the need of your company's requirement. So having those local tech talents into our pool of resources really played an additional value for us at that point of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadyap. I think these are some great suggestions. I like the last one, having your tech resources, but I also like that you guys analyzed the market, looked at the trends, and kind of were very adaptive, right? I think that's something startups kind of build, right? They kind of iterate out, figuring out solutions as they go. I'm now moving to Rahat Bhai. Hey, Rahat Bhai. Sorry. So many people here got mixed. No, Rahat Bhai, so I think Anchorless is one of the most active VCs. And what I really like about Anchorless is that a lot of the recent investments that you are doing, these are done with co-financing, right? With international investors, whether it's investments like in Maya, right? And a lot of your portfolio companies like Loop or Shiko are also raising international investments, right? From large, world's top investors. So, if you could explain a bit, how did Anchorless help in that particular process? Who is right now interested in the Bangladesh market, and what do startups have to do to build those qualities that would allow them to tap into this investor network. Bharat, over to you.
Sure. Thanks everybody for being here. That's a great question. That's, and for those unfamiliar, Anchorless is actually a New York-based fund that only invests in Bangladeshi startups. So one of our goals as a fund is to bring in international capital in the market. One of the things that we've learned is for a lot of funds that are out there, say in Singapore, Hong Kong, or New York, we went and talked to a lot of them, and what they want is to feel more comfortable about the market, because most of these companies don't have offices on the ground. So as the ecosystem grows and there are more resources available, I think naturally and organically, we're going to have more investors come in. Explicitly from our side, what we like to do, especially going forward, and you'll see that with a few of our future deals, is we like to do co-investments with another international investor that tends to have more of a vertical expertise. The best example is actually probably that's already in the market is Shiko. Shiko is a deal where, Shahir and Zishan, we've been talking to them, founders, for a very long time. That company's fundraising from day one was pretty much structured to be able to raise venture on a scalable basis. And that meant the beginning conversation I ever had with Shahir was in January of 2020, introduced incidentally by Nirjor, where he had nothing but a presentation. And from that moment on, he kept in touch and said, hey, this is how we're going to grow the company, and this is how the cap table is going to look. This is what type of investors we're bringing in. So the angels are high quality, the early investors are high quality, and everybody has the same mission from day one. And so what happened was at some point, about a year and a half in, we really liked the company, and Shahir came to us and said, hey, look, Learn Capital, which helped precede the company, is very interested in co-leading. Would you be interested? And so we ended up talking to Learn, and we had really good rapport with a fund. And so Learn is a specialist in EdTech out of Silicon Valley. And we're here on the ground in Bangladesh. So that made for a good combo. And then we ended up bringing in Wavemaker, and then Ankur Nagpal from Vibe Capital came in, and then we built around. What was great about that, again, is Shahir was solving a fundamental problem. He has domain expertise in what he's doing. And when I say that is his parents are both educators, and he has historically worked with money, working on the finance side in the UK. And his co-founder, Zishan, is an educator. So when you're bringing the deal to the table, you actually have the ability to actually execute. And I think the third part, which was very, very important, was that he has learned how to fundraise in a way that makes international investors comfortable that in 6 months or 12 months or 24 months, Shahir is not going to go back and be like, oh my God, I'm running out of money. It's more like, hey, I've got 9 months of runway, or I've got 12 months of runway, but I need to be more aggressive. We need to raise more money, which incidentally is actually what he did. After closing $1.3 million, he called a board meeting 2 months later. It's like, I need a lot more money. And luckily enough, majority of the existing investors actually doubled down. So he didn't actually have to go and start at square one. This is the kind of things that I think a lot of international investors are looking for. Large scale solutions where the alternative investment, which could be in Singapore, Indonesia, Pakistan, India, Vietnam, is not as good as the one we offer here in Bangladesh. And we have to remember that, is that people do not, and I say this a lot, people don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to invest in a Bangladeshi startup. They wake up in the morning and say, I want to have the best investment possible. So we need to be able to offer that. In terms of where the deal interest is coming from Southeast Asia and Middle East are actually very strong. And the reason for that is, I think people have to remember venture capital funds have investors. I have investors. My investors tend to be primarily US, some European. When they give me money, they want explicitly Bangladesh exposure. When they give a Southeast Asian fund money or a Middle Eastern fund money, they don't think about Bangladesh, but those fund managers can go to the investors and say, hey, look, Bangladesh for Middle East is culturally very similar. Southeast Asia is geographically fairly close. They can stretch their mandate to include Bangladesh in it. One thing you'll notice is Indian funds don't tend to do deals in Bangladesh, because if I'm a US investor, if I give an Indian fund money, I probably want that money to stay in India. Versus in Southeast Asia, Singapore to Bangladesh is not as much of a stretch. So this is something we have to remember. Then you have the European and US funds. European and US funds that are interested in Bangladesh tend to be global funds that look for thematic stories. So funds will come to us and say, hey, we want emerging fintech, right? Or we want emerging healthcare. And we then have to be able to provide companies in that vertical that makes sense for them. So that's kind of the angle that we approach. And so we keep a list of about, I think at this point, like 95 funds around the world. So let's say, one of our founders comes to me and says, hey, we need to raise money. I'll go through that list and I'll say, okay, these 17 funds make sense for you. Let's set up introductions. So it's a process that we've had to build over the last 2 years, but it's becoming increasingly efficient for our founders.
Thank you, Rab. I think when you explain it, it sounds so easy and natural, right? And like a common sense thing to do. But I know in truth, this takes years of work, the work that you put in managing your limited partners. And again, the years of work for the startups to come to that level as well. But it's good to hear kind of take a under the hood look on how this works. And I think this would help the founders as well. I think because we are short on time, we have to finish at 5 sharp. It's a Thursday afternoon. I don't want to keep people waiting and maybe get ahead of the traffic. So we will be opening up the floor for questions, Q&A. I see that we have a few questions on the chat, but if you want to ask a question, please use the Zoom function to raise your hand, and then when you ask the questions, your name and then the question itself as quickly as simply as possible, because we don't have a lot of time. So with that, I think we'll be moving on to the Q&A part. I think we can all see the Q&As, but I think let us see that what are some of the questions that we can take up. I'm just gonna browse through. I think one of the first questions I think we have. So I think the first question is that how can we reach? I think this one is from Junaid. How can we reach proper organizations who can help with developing startup policies? For example, we wanted a payment gateway from a provider. However, our genre of company was not listed based on government rules. How can you overcome this? It's a very interesting question, because when startups are innovating. Hassan Bhai, do you want to take that? I do know that you have to leave in around 5 minutes, so maybe get you off early. Yeah. So it's startups often they face policy hurdles when they're innovating, and I think you have seen a few in this startup Bangladesh portfolio as well. So how they can overcome this? Yeah. Hassan Bhai, over to you.
Yeah, definitely. It is a very good question. Right. So, I mean, not knowing the whole detail about the issue here, but I get the essence of the question. Right. I mean, a lot of the startups we have seen, the rules and regulations always follow the innovation. Right. So that's why we are always trying to catch up. And we are looking into some startups that we have in our portfolio, and we would definitely look into other startups, because the Startup Bangladesh is a strategic initiative to support the startup ecosystem, not only our portfolio startups. So any startup that struggles with any policy that may be a little fuzzy, may not be clear in a gray area, but they have a good intention, good business plan, good business. So we would like to help them. In that case, we would see if we can put them with, depending on where it fits in, with NRB or Bangladesh Bank, or anywhere we can do a sandboxing, right? So we have started some. So those are the things we can do, because policy, if there's no regulations, or regulations are not clear, or policy is not clear, it's a risky to start that business, right? One day you can get shut down, right? Because you're not abiding by it. But if you bring up front that, okay, this is the issue, this is a good business, and it's all honest business, right? Then we can bring it to the proper authorities. Say, can we put in a sandbox? Can you go give an NOC? And we work together. So I am open to open door to us for everybody. If you guys have any great idea, if you're struggling with the policy, please contact us. Right, we have our contact information, and we'll try to support you in regards to policies. I hope that answers the question.
No, thank you, Hassan Bhai. I think that's super useful. And again, glad that Startup Bangladesh Limited is helping. Thank you for that support, and I hope that answers. The next question is from Lufi Bhai. I think it's on, if an startup wants to kind of expand multi-region, how a VC can help them kind of grow. Maybe I'll shoot this to Rahat Bhai, because I know that one of your portfolio companies, Maya, also launched in Pakistan. So maybe you can help us shed a bit of light how that happened. Yeah.
Sure. I think in general, the job of a venture fund is to assist the founders in achieving their goals. And I think the conversation is, what is the direction that you want to take? So if it is international, we'll make the connections and the resources available. An easy example actually is a company, a SaaS company in our portfolio called MyAlice. MyAlice wanted to expand into the Philippines because it's a software play, so it's a little easier to move boundaries. And we made an introduction to a party who now has become their local partner, right? And I think a VC's job is to do things like that. What it isn't is to run the day-to-day. That is why whoever the founders are, they need to have the domain expertise to run the company day-to-day.
Thank you, Rahat. Thank you for elaborating that. I think we have this question from Ron from Uddakta Geri. I'm hoping I pronounced it right. So he has asked, what are the must-have requirements, documents to get investment for any startup? So I think I can give that to Nijar. I know you also have to run for your flight, but I think since you have worked on investment readiness early stage with a lot of ventures, so maybe you can help answer that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think our requirements are maybe not as extensive as potential VC funds. So I think that's where maybe Rahat can give some nuance. But I think for us, it starts with a pitch deck, right? And there's a ton of literature out there on what makes a good pitch deck. Rahat's put things out there. We put things out there, but definitely have a very strong pitch deck. I think that covers things such as why now, right? Why there is a current enabling environment for whatever idea that you have. Obviously, it talks about the points of differentiation beyond, well, my competitors are not digital and I'm digital. My competitors are expensive, I'm not expensive. That T chart that a lot of founders do. But yeah, I'll go beyond that, be able to obviously tell about, I think as Rahat mentioned, right? I think I still remember that Chico pitch deck, and I think talking about the expertise of the founders, the way they had really, even if when they didn't have an app, they had good wireframes that show, visualized what the app could look like, what it could do for its consumers, even quantifying the potential of the market by breaking it down between the TAM, the overall market, but then getting it gradually down to, here's our year one objectives, and here's why we need your capital, right? I think it's still one of my biggest regrets, actually. And I think that's where I learned to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to part-time founders, because sooner or later they're going to go full-time, and I think I should have gone in. Then maybe we could have showcased Chico as part of our portfolio, but Rahat got it, and I'm really glad they did, and all kudos to both Anchorless and Chico, right? But definitely, and I think that is also a good point, is that I think you should also try to befriend some of the more mature founders who raise capital. I always found them to be quite helpful and quite open to mentorship. And I think, spend some time with them, even spend time with people like us, with the intent that, look, I don't necessarily want to just pitch you, but I also want to get your feedback, right? It's always a journey, I think, in that process. But yeah, going back to the original question, it's pitch deck. Definitely have a financial plan, but I don't need a particularly like an extensive financial model. I think an 18-month plan would be good. A data room with kind of your legal documents, or your financial documents, various contracts and other things and ways for us to at least verify your initial traction, whether that traction is measured by users, whether its traction is measured by revenue, and or a combination. I think for us to kind of measure those things beyond whatever you say, whether it's through bank statements, Bcash statements, etc. And it doesn't have to be fully, we're quite flexible, right? As angel investors, if there's a 10-20% discrepancy, it's not like we're counting every bean. I don't think that makes sense. But if there's a 50%, 80%, then there's some questions to be asked. But I think those are some of the things that we want you to have, at least at the angel stage.
Thank you, Nijar Bhai. And I think Anchorless, had this regulatory checklist done for startups with S. I think we will be sharing that on the email that we do on the follow-up. And I think Startup Bangladesh Limited has this checklist they have developed for startups they do due diligence on. And maybe I think if that's public, we can also share that as well. I think I'll go to Sadyapa with because you are raising funds, and a share trip has been through the pandemic and now possibly facing the current funding scenario. This is question from Faizur from MentMe. So he has asked that what impact Bangladesh startups will face, if any, on the investment scenario given the global economic downturn that's happening. So do you want to share your views on that?
Sure. Basically, this is a very big question, I would say, that what are the impacts that can take place? There are so many external variables that can impact the fundraising process and the confirmation from, especially if you're talking with international VCs or angel investors or whichever category that you're talking about. The recent war, the inflation of the dollar value, all these things are actually playing a very big factor. But the thing that we, according to my experience and during our journey with ShareTrip, the thing that we have seen is that although the external variables cannot be controlled, and we cannot literally guarantee that whether they're going to change within a near time frame or a very recent restructuring of the entire situation will take place. But some of the key parameters that might kind of give a competitive edge regarding the confirmation, or to take the conversation at least to the next stage, is as Nirjhar said, that how fast you are planning to grow, what are the things you want to showcase, how are you differentiating yourselves in the market, do you have an industry homework done, do you have a global homework done? So these things kind of give an assurance, I think, from the investor's perspective, that whether you know the market that you're playing in. And in addition to that, I think for Bangladesh, one of the key challenges is that, I think we were discussing with Hassan Arif Bhai that day, that reflecting or showcasing Bangladesh to the global investors, especially the big organizations or the people who can play a significant role in kind of maturing the startup ecosystem. I think that is where we have to focus a bit more not on an individual level, but on a collective level, because ShareTrip might be doing very well, Shiko might be doing very well, but whenever an international player comes into investing in ShareTrip or Shiko or Maya, they would like to know that how Bangladesh is able to actually support him. Like the recent development with Startup Bangladesh working with Dhaka Stock Exchange, this is one of the examples of how Bangladesh is actually kind of contributing to the startup ecosystem. So I think that playing in those areas and kind of maturing in these areas would be a lot more helpful and beneficial for all the startups, whether they're in the seed stage, growth stage, or even in Series A and B, to confirm the investments especially from international level. Thank you, Bijon.
Well, thank you, Sadia-Appu. And I think it's very exciting that you kind of touched upon the micro part, microzonal organization, also the macro part as well. So I think I like that as well. There's this interesting question from Leonica, and maybe Rahat, you can touch upon that. It said that we have seen a lot of these activities in financial technology, education, and health. But what are some of the other potential sectors that you're looking at, which are often underlooked at this point in time? Yeah.
Sure. I think there are two sectors that could use a significantly more amount of innovation. I think, frankly, the first one is garments. For an industry that does 40 billion in exports, we haven't really seen that many garments options come out. The other one is healthcare. Now, there are some good healthcare companies. I'm not taking that away, but this is a big market in a country of this many people with the rising middle class. We need more healthcare companies that we think are more defensible and venture investable. So I'm really looking forward to some of those solutions, because I think those could be of major interest for certain investors.
Thank you, Rahat. I think we will take one more question, and then possibly we can wrap up. And this is for you, Nirjhar. So there's this technical question from Faizur, is that, can you raise investments? So they have asked that, can they raise investments from Anchorless in Bangladesh with roll-up vehicles? So, I mean, I think because you have a lot of expertise on that, do you want to answer that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think Rahat can answer as well. It's very interesting. This year we've been very active on Anchorless. I think we've done at least 4 or 5 deals, and I think we were trying to make it a practice that whenever we raise money, I think side by side we'll try to distribute through Anchorless. Now, I think one of the challenges of Anchorless is, I think, to really get good traction in fundraising through that, you want to align with a group, right? So there are syndicate leads, including our own Sajid Rahman Pai, who's a board member of BAN and who's also a very famous angel investor from Bangladesh, probably the most famous angel investor internationally from Bangladesh. But he's built an entire kind of career investing in Anchorless, and everybody kind of always looks to him whenever there's a deal from Bangladesh, right? But I think you need a very good lead. There's, the gentleman is talking about roll-up vehicles where founders themselves will, create an SPV, and that SPV is controlled by the founder, which gives it a lot of flexibility compared to a syndicate lead, and also for the investors as well, because there's not as much fees, including carry for a syndicate lead for a roll-up vehicle. So I think I would encourage all Bangladeshi companies to really look at AngelList. Obviously, you have to think about the profile investors as well. I think they're mostly based in the US and Canada, maybe a little bit. I think AngelList is not as popular in Europe. They have their own one for India as well. But definitely, I think, look, I know a lot of founders are very active on LinkedIn, but I definitely encourage you to take a look at AngelList and start putting yourself out there to potential syndicate leads and getting yourself, noticed for sure. But yeah, definitely the mechanics is I think you definitely need an international entity, whether it's a Singapore entity or a Delaware entity. I think a lot of syndicates prefer Delaware entities out of AngelList. So once again, it's just like hitting up any investor, right? You can't just blindly do it, spray and pray, but rather thinking conscientiously about their portfolios, what they funded before, what their thesis is, how they do it, and then having a personalized approach, including Anurag talks a lot about getting warm intros as well. Those kinds of things I think matter a lot. But definitely I encourage everybody in this room, if you're raising, think about AngelList as well as other platforms. Think about everything as part of your strategy.
Thank you, Richard. I think with that, we are almost at the end. I think we are minus 2 minutes. So I will just go for one final round of closing remarks from our panelists. Rahat bhai, starting off with you, what is the one thing you are most excited about in the next 12 months?
I think, look, it's a combination of two things. I can fairly comfortably say there's a lot of investors around the world who are really excited about Bangladesh. So I hope that we can offer them larger deals. And that's important because a lot of investors, especially in the US and Europe, their minimum check size is around $5 to $10 million. And let's say it's a $10 million check, that means the round's closer to 20 to 25, which means the valuation has to be closer to 100. We do not have enough companies in the country that can actually absorb that kind of capital. So what I'd love to see, and I think we will see more of them, are companies that scale up to that point where we can have our founders go and raise, meaningful checks in countries like the UK and the US, and really, really start putting Bangladesh startup ecosystem on the map.
Thank you, Rahat bhai. Sadiapa, over to you.
I'm actually would say that I'm very hopeful regarding the next 12 months because being in the startup ecosystem, I'm seeing that compared to the last 3 years that we've been operating in this ecosystem, there has been significant developments and changes in terms of people's mindset, in terms of modifications and changes to the policy level, as you have mentioned, as Hassan has mentioned. And all these will have a very significant contributing effect to the money for the growth of each and every startup across different industries. So this is something that really excites all of us who are directly involved in this community. And we are very excited, very hopeful for the future.
Thank you, Sadiapa. And lastly, Nijor, before you go to your flight, parting words for us.
Yeah, I think, fundamentally, what does a startup seek to do? It seeks to change behavior, right? You're offering a new platform by which people do maybe ingrained or existing kind of activities, right? And I think, my view is behavior, it's very hard to change behavior in good times, right? People change their behavior whenever there's a big upheaval, or they tend to accelerate that behavior shift, right? So one thing we saw during pandemic was obviously staying at home, remote work, which is now surprisingly, quite common in Bangladesh, or online schooling and education, which created the opportunity for companies like Shikor, 10-minute school, for example. So I think, I think it's all about, look, there will be hard times ahead, but I think we're used to hard times because, we live in Bangladesh, we deal with, low access to capital, hard to do business, all those kinds of things, right? But I think, if at the core of what you do is to deliver value to people in their lives, I think there's definitely opportunities then to acquire customers and retain them. So I think that's something to just continue to focus on, and let's work together to do that.
Thank you, Richard bhai. With that, I think we are 1 minute over the timeline. Sorry about that. Have a nice weekend. And I think next week we have 2 holidays. So, enjoy your time, and, we will see you at our next webinar. Thank you again, and, have a great weekend. Take care, everyone.